matches which have cost millions upon millions of pounds and caused such upset around...
He won't do that.
He won't do that, but he should do that. So Peter Bleksley's on the show.
OK.
Jonathan Sacerdote is on the show to talk about the future of the Middle East. Trump is being elected on the 20th of January. Anna McGovern did the papers. So much rich chat from 10.
And Reform are just shy, 525 short of overtaking the Conservatives in membership. 526, actually, I should say, because they've got to get one past 131,680. They're at 131,155. Hey, talking of 5, it won't be 5 a.m., it'll be 6 a.m. I'm here tomorrow, so make sure you join me, same time, same place. Johnny's next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a warm welcome and Merry Christmas, for it is still the season of goodwill. And well done and thank you to Christo for the last 4-hour marathon of breakfast right here on Talk. My name's Jonny Gould. I'm here for the next 2.5 hours until 12:30 when we cross to the very capable studios of Talk Sport for your busiest of Boxing Day sports action. It is absolutely the busiest day of sport in the calendar, and for that reason, later on in the show, we're going to talk to my old buddy, you'll know him, Sam Sports Stevens, about the enormous amount of racing going on, the full Premier League programme, and it's usually traditionally the time which a lot of people think, well, some of the Premier League title race may be becoming a little bit clearer. Is it a 2-horse race? Is it a 3-horse race? I'll tell you one thing, it isn't a Manchester City horse race, for they're down in 7th. And even Bournemouth and Nottingham Forest are above them. That's the kind of crazy season we've had so far. So that is a little bit of a tinsy bit of sport coming up a bit later. But for those of you who aren't into sport, fear not. We have rich, detailed conversation on the show today. And look, I know it's the season of goodwill, and I know that, you know, life goes on, and you know, we're going to do a bit of light stuff, but we're going to do a bit of sort of serious, meaty stuff as well. I asked Christo just before as we were handing over, I think the police have too many powers. Christo said, yes, but Sadiq Khan doesn't have the budget, but he could curtail the budget on the enormous wasted millions of pounds and divisive hate marches which have turned the West End into a political battleground at the weekends, when actually it's a place of leisure. It's a place of shopping and theatres and tourism. And this is the real bother with me. I think that the Police and Crime Commissioner, which is automatically the job of the elected mayor, should be a separate agency. And we know that Sadiq Khan sacked the previous Met Police chief, Cressida Dick. And I wonder whether he actually stepped out of line in doing that, because surely it's the Home Office, the Home Secretary that should do such a thing. So it's one person, two jobs, two bosses. So the whole thing is a real kerfuffle. And I'm going to talk to Peter Bleksley about this, because Peter told me when we were out the other night, he said, look, if it was an elected position, I would like to stand for it. And I think there should be a little bit of a separation of powers. And furthermore, I think the election cycle should be mid-term. So that, for example, you know how it works in politics. In the middle of a term, the leader becomes unpopular, and so you get the opposition guy in. Maybe it shouldn't be a political person. Maybe it should be a copper. Peter Bleksley is in. Because on calls on this show, I've had people who had hospital appointments, but they didn't want to go into the West End because of the people they encounter on the train going to the protests. What a terrible thing. People won't go to hospital and observe their appointments because there's a sort of feral atmosphere. Someone also said I had tickets to go and see a lovely theatre show. I didn't go to that either because I'm an older lady. I'm a bit scared of what I get on the trains. What a sad state of affairs the hate marches have been in London, and probably in your town and city too. 0344 499 1000. Peter Bleksley is on the line later. And we've got Jonathan Sacerdotti in as well a bit later. He's going to talk about the Middle East, the return of Donald Trump to the White House and what it means to the wider Middle East. And Vladimir Putin issued a horrible Christmas gift to Ukraine on the 25th of December by a huge bombing campaign. And Cormac Smith will be in on that a little bit later on, Ukrainian expert. The reason Putin picked Christmas Day is because last year Zelensky decided to move the Orthodox Christmas date of January the 6th to the traditional Western Christmas Day of the 25th. And so this is a particularly nasty message which Putin is issuing on his neighbour. 0344 499 1000. But first, before all that, we're going to review the papers and say a very good morning and Merry Christmas to Anna McGovern.
Hello.
Hello.
Lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm
down
glad
the
you're
line.
here. Thank goodness. I thought you might be in, but there's a lovely fireplace behind you. That looks very august. Where you? Is that your hall?
This is actually a wardrobe. It's not a fireplace, so it looks pretty deceiving. Like, I was meant to be in, but the train station was closed, which I figured out when I got there.
Oh.
So I should have probably known better, but there you go.
Well,
I'm here down the line.
At least you're here. And I tell you what, I'm glad you're here. I'll tell you why. Because we had a paper reviewer on my Christmas Eve show, and there was a slight design fault because, of course, there are no newspapers on Christmas Day. So, you know what Claire Muldoon's like. She won't say a boo to a goose, so all we did was just tap our fingers and said absolutely nothing for an hour.
Well, what can you do?
No, we talked about...
That's the reality of the media. You just have to wing it sometimes.
Well, we talked
Things go wrong.
We talked about yesterday's news, but also, actually, the truth is that even though there isn't a physical newspaper because all the newsagents are shut, and it's also 20th century having a newspaper around, isn't it? That actually the websites are full of news, and the news cycle continues on Christmas Day, whatever, there's a news bulletin, etc. It might be full of light news about where's Father Christmas and all this malarkey, but there is still real news out there. And as Christo mentioned towards the end of his show, there is about to be a revolution of membership, at least, between Reform UK and the Conservative Party in about, I don't know, half an hour, a day, a week or so. There will be more registered members of the Reform Party than the Conservatives, Anna.
You know what? This doesn't surprise me whatsoever. I think for many people, they were so fed up with the way the Conservative Party performed, especially like the last government, which I think is why a lot of people voted for Labour. But then I think they've been abysmally disappointed with what's actually been delivered by them. That, you know, made promises, they've broken them, and people are fed up. And I think for, you know, Reform, they see the Reform in the party and Nigel Farage as potentially paving a new way. I have so much respect as well for Rupert Lowe. Everything that he's posting, that he's talking about right now is absolutely spot on and really resonates with people, which I don't think Labour is quite achieving. So I think for many people who were Conservative supporters, they're seeing Reform as potentially being that, you know, paving the way and actually standing for Conservative values.
And Nigel Farage has said something which I've been thinking for a while, which is that there was a post-First World War revolution in the election box, because it was always the Tories and the Whigs, the Tories and the Liberals, which are kind of the modern-day Republicans and Democrats in the USA, give or take a few left-wing leanings on the Democratic side. When Labour got their first election victory shortly after the First World War. And what he's saying is it's the right of British politics that is undergoing a revolution, that maybe, just maybe, the Conservatives, who have largely been the government of the last 150 years, give or take a few elections, are about to lose their footing to this new version of conservatism that you're mentioning, the Reform Party. Could it be possible that Nigel Farage goes from 5 MPs to 300? I mean, is that possible in one election?
You know what? I think it could very much be possible. I think for many people, like the supporters, they have felt for so long that the Conservative Party is not actually standing for Conservative values. And if anything, some of the things that the MPs have been coming out with, some of the policies they've been standing for, have, and for many people, just sort of seem quite left-wing. And if you're a member of the Conservative Party, you're going to hope that the Conservatives actually stand for Conservative values, which I think they felt massively let down. And I think for many people who would have been Conservative supporters, they see Reform as paving that new way forward. They're speaking about issues that people truly care about, that Labour are avoiding. So I think many people are really fed up with the direction that we're seeing this country going, and Reform could be the answer to actually pushing back against that.
Now, of course, it's the red wall that is going to be the place where the election battle will take place, just as it did when Boris Johnson was elected in 2019 and just when it was when Keir Starmer was elected this year in July. And as it turned out, because what Boris did or didn't do, and because of the sort of falling like dominoes Conservative prime ministers that happened since with Liz Truss and with Rishi Sunak, effectively the disaffected Labour voters of 2019 did return, if reluctantly, to Keir Starmer, because this was a loveless landslide, wasn't it, as they're calling it. So again, the red wall will be the place where election victories will be won or lost. Will they really fall to Reform, who came second in so many constituencies in 2024?
I believe as well, if I'm correct, that when we're considering the votes that were made in the general election, the actual total number of votes for the Conservatives and Reform respectively were actually higher than the number of votes that Labour got, if we're talking about in terms of the share of votes and MPs that were elected. And which I think, of course, that just says it all for a start. And I think as long as we we have candidates in those constituencies that really care, really understand what the constituents want to see change. For example, Rupert Lowe, again, fantastic example. We're seeing people from all sides of the political spectrum supporting him and really resonating with what he has to say. I think as long as we've got candidates that are bold enough like him to really take an interest in what the constituents want and speak up on things that other people aren't doing right now, I do truly believe that we could see this happening.
Really? I mean, because Reform came second to Labour in many constituencies, and Nigel Farage has said that the battleground is to get Labour voters as much as Conservatives. But as you say, if you add up the Tory and Reform votes together, they thrashed Labour in the popular vote, and of course they would have won the seats, which begs the question. The full name of the Conservative Party is the Conservative and Unionist Party. There was some kind of merger going on in time in memoriam. Will we see a Conservative and Reform Party? How will they divvy up the leadership if that happens? Or is Farage going for the jugular and trying to kick the Tories out? That's what he seems to be saying now. But I guess as we move nearer to the election in 4.5 years' time, he might lighten up on that.
You know what? I think so much can change even in a year, let alone 4.5 years. I think a big hope for them, if they really want to win, if they could form some kind of union together, they would have an even bigger chance. But then I also sort of think, are the Conservative Party done for? Because I think as well, they needed to lose the election. I think many disappointed Conservative voters either swung towards Reform or even some did a protest vote towards Labour because they were so fed up. And I think we could see, if they were to actually, with the Conservatives, they needed that time in the backbenches to actually redefine themselves as a party and actually stand for Conservative values. If there is a way that they could work together and be one really strong government, that would be quite promising. But is it too late? I think that's the question that we also need to consider.
I tell you what, I think that Reform's 4.1 million votes will be improved on in the next general election. I know that's a very, very long way out, but I think it's inevitable the way things are going. And who knows who the Tory leader might be in 4 years' time. And the reason why I think that Reform need to really seriously think about a merger or some kind of relationship with the Conservatives in the election is because they came second in only 98 seats during the election, which means that the Conservatives still have, even though they were really thoroughly beaten, they still have some electoral power, and they're even ahead in the polls. Effectively, the right's vote is split, and that's why Labour won the election. And it does look like, even though people are very disaffected by what they've seen of this Labour government so far, that the Conservatives and Reforms do need to club together at some point.
No, I completely agree. And I think what the Conservatives need to do, they need to redefine themselves as a party. They need to assess the reasons why they lost. I think a big part of the reason why they lost was during the COVID lockdowns, the way that people were lied to, manipulated, and they felt utterly betrayed by the government. And I think that's why a lot of people lost trust in them. And how could you vote for a party leadership that's meant to represent you when you've lost complete faith in the government? So I think they need to really look at themselves and reassess who they actually are as a party. And then if there is a way that they could come together and be really strong, that would be fantastic. I do wonder, though, if the Conservative Party might be too concerned with optics to really stand for the issues that people care about. That's a question I'd also have as well. But if they could come to some kind of understanding, that would be great. And I think that would be very strong, but we'll just have to see.
I want to talk about Kemi Badenoch here, because everyone was so interested when she got elected. She is like no other Tory leader that there's ever been. She doesn't look like anything or anybody that's been before. And she spoke like it was. And I remember leading up to the Tory election for the leadership, she gave Angela Rayner a right roasting on housing. And we thought, this woman, she speaks the truth. There were some questions about whether she was as right-wing in appeal as Robert Jenrick, but she hasn't made that electoral start, that start that we were hoping for, because actually her biggest rival is not the Prime Minister. It's Farage, isn't it? And she hasn't cut through. Why is that, Anna?
Well, for a start, I think she needs to stop being so concerned about debating over sandwiches. That would be a good start. And I think I think as well, I don't think she's made any particularly strong stances since being put into that position. I personally haven't seen anything that's been majorly remarkable or stand out as of yet. I hope maybe that might change. I don't know. But I would say, out of the two, between herself and Robert Jenrick did seem more like the more right-wing conservative leader, whereas she probably more swung towards centrist, maybe not the same sort of stance that Robert Jenrick necessarily had. But I would also wager that maybe it was Kemi Badenoch more of a safer bet for the party. So it was something that I would consider. But I think with these MPs and leaders, they just need to take a stand. And actually, I think what they really need to do is, again, I'm going to bang on about Rupert Lowe, because I just think he's so fantastic. Take example by him and really just be bold, really care about what the constituents' issues are, and take those stances, really do your research. I think the sort of work he's doing at the moment, the research, the essays that he's publishing are so fascinating and resonate with so many. And I think if other MPs followed by example, we would see some huge differences.
Anna McGovern is reviewing our newspapers this morning. If you want to join in the debate, 0344 499 1000, 87222 on the text. And, of course, you can always tweet us at talkTV and at Jonny Gould. The latest membership numbers are Reform UK membership 131,272 and the Conservatives 131,680. Reform are due to surpass the Tory membership today by this lunchtime, says Colin from Corby. Morning to you, Colin. Farage is a busted flush, says Bobby, and I voted Reform. And he's got in and joined the status quo. I had hoped Reform meant reform. When the manifesto of a whole new political system, our system today is too old. We need a Scottish-style parliament, a modern one. Scrap the second home, scrap the old get the speaker, says Bob in Chiswick. It's unfiltered debate and chat here. And we're going to talk in just a moment about the police. I think that the Police and Crime Commissioner should be a separate office from that of the Mayor of London and, in fact, the mayors of any other metropolitan city. Why? Because the hate marches continue, they divide the community and they scare people. They keep people out of the West End. It is anti-business, it's anti-life, and we really need to stop doing this. And John in Wallington, just to bring us into the break, Merry Christmas, says John, Merry Christmas to you. In keeping with the Christmas theme, may I point out that Starmer's chestnuts are going to be roasted by Reform at the next general election. And I can't think of a better way to go to the commercial break. I'll speak to you in a minute.
heard from young people saying they can't afford the rail tickets to get to see their families.
The rail fares, well, we've just nationalised the railways. The very first
but the
bill
fares aren't coming down, are they?
No, they will once the franchises return to public ownership, so that's a pretty big
That
bold
is not my understanding, but OK, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
One of the reasons why this new government is so unpopular is because their policies are so powerful and so divisive that the unintended consequences of them are vast. You cannot upset the basis of the economy with such hardened, difficult policies which are anti-business and actually, I think, anti-social. And I'm going to point to this paper here, which is the front of the Mail. I'm going to read this story. Anna McGovern's reviewing the papers with us this morning. There's an action plan as private schools face bankruptcy from the Times newspaper. Officials have monitored those at risk of collapse. OK, pressure on state places after the VAT increase. Basically, you know that contingency plans are being drawn up now for an increase in demand for state school places amid fears that private schools will go bankrupt and close because of fee increases. Officials are braced for the prospect of some independent schools collapsing when VAT on fees comes into force in the new year. Schools that are smaller with lower fees and in areas with higher levels of competition are most at risk. And government sources have told the Times they're being monitored to see how fare under the change, combined with publicly available information about their finances from Companies House. This VAT imposition on education will come into effect next week. Treasury estimates suggest that it will lead to 37,000 fewer private school pupils in the long term, a reduction of about 6%. However, there is expected to be a smaller, more immediate impact because about 3,000 children will be taken out of private schools and will therefore immediately need a state education before the end of the academic year. In an effort to reduce the fallout, officials have been instructed to monitor private schools' vulnerability to closure, along with their capacity in state schools. I really hate this policy. I hate this policy. State school education is better than it was in my day, there's no doubt about that. And I think Michael Gove has a lot to do with that. I think the education policies under the Tories were actually quite good. You know, there is a determination at state school level to improve their lot, but to punish ingenuity amongst an elite, yet they are an elite and they can afford public school, okay, but to punish those people for the education that they might get is the worst kind, I think, of left-wing politics because it's antisocial, it's anti-ingenuity. There are some great public schools out there, and whatever you think about it being an unlevel playing field and all that, they're still needed as part of a pluralistic society. I don't care what people say about this, really. It is awful, and of course it's led to the potential collapse of the public school, let's call it industry. Anna McGovern, what do you think to that?
This actually makes me so angry because I think there's this assumption from people that, oh, if you go to private school, your parents must be rich. But you know what? Many parents, families who choose to send their children to private school, they have to work incredibly hard to be able to afford those fees, making sacrifices on the way just so they can give their children the best chance in life if they're in a position where they're able to. And I just personally think this policy is genuine, is targeting those families who work incredibly hard, and it just looks like it's like they're hating on private schools.
Yeah, they hate the rich. Yeah. It just looks terrible.
They hate the rich. I know personally, I was very fortunate. I could go to private school, but my family had to work incredibly hard and had to make sacrifices for me to be able to have that opportunity. And I know so many people who would have said the same thing as well. I think it's about choice. There's many different kinds of private schools as well. So for example, for children who have special needs, a private school might be a better environment for them because they're more equipped to be able to attend to their needs as well. And I just think it's awful. It's hating. It's like tax the rich. It's like targeting them. It's like targeting them directly. That's what the policy seems to be aimed towards. And I just personally think let families be able to decide where they want to send their children to schools. As well, the state sector, I personally worked in both private school sector and the state school sector as well. And I think there's a lot more that needs to be done towards state schools. I remember I was a cover supervisor for a class when I was 19, and it made me so sad because there were over 40 children in that class and just me, and there were like a few years age difference. And what made me so sad is that 80-90% of the time you spend managing behaviour, and then you don't know if there are kids who are really excelling at the work and might be able to progress to some more advanced work, or some kids who might be really struggling and not able to speak up because it's just such a crowded environment. So I think there needs to be so much more done to help these state schools, but then at the same time, don't penalise families who wish to have the option to send their children to private schools.
Absolutely, Anna. I think that pluralism is one of the richnesses of our society, and however unfair or the level playing field is, whilst everyone should have opportunity, we should live in a meritocratic society. That's what I believe. Anna McGovern, listen, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the papers this morning. Let's wrap up the debate here with Anna, because Mick's tweeted us. Hello, Mick. It's amazing how quickly the police have gone to the bottom of the ladder regarding public confidence, yet no police chiefs have been held to account. I say this because Peter Bleksley is on the show next to talk about whether the Police and Crime Commissioner should be a separate role from that of the Mayor. Policing with consent has gone, says Mick. Happy Boxing Day, says James in Manchester. Johnny, can you answer me this? Who is more likely to turn it around, Pep City or Starmer's Labour? They both look like they're going down the chute. And Bob Mankin in Aberdeen, good morning to you, Anne. Bob, there's a couple of mentions here, a little warning to Reform if they want to join up with the Tories. As an ex-Tory member and voter now of the Reform team, if Reform do a deal with the Tories, I, for one, would be out. As a voter, I've been betrayed enough. A deal with the Tories would be another betrayal. Thank you very much for that, Bob. And John says pretty much the same thing. Reform will win the next election, but any pact with the Tories would lose them votes. They are going from strength to strength. The Tories are in decline. And if you look back too much in your discussion on Reform, says Adrian Baird, something magical happens if Reform can capture another 7% of the total vote, 7%. Go to electoral calculus and feed in the numbers. If Reform take 3.5% from both Labour and Conservatives, not only do they win, but they win with an overall majority, predicts Adrian. This is what terrifies the old main parties and the establishment. Fascinating discussion. Thanks for your engagement this morning. Terrific conversation, which will continue with Peter Bleksley. Stay tuned to talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a warm welcome to your Boxing Day morning. My name is Jonny Gould and I'm here till 12:30 when we hand over the reins to Talk Sport, because it is the busiest of sporting days. Boxing Day is chock full of huge amount of racing and full programme of football. Most of it kicks off at 3 p.m, as is the tradition. Some of it starts at 12:30. Sam Stevens will be along to talk to me about that later on in the programme. But first, you know, this Labour government want to give mayors more power around the country, OK? And they want to scrap some elements of council power to give mayors more autonomy around the country. Now, as I look at that, I think there is the potential for a deficit in democracy here. You know, if they sweep these things through, then the mayor will become more of an executive and more powerful. And I don't think we can afford to do that in a democracy where the consequences of such mayoral power produce such division. And I'm talking about the hate marches which have been going on all year through London and have spilt over all over the country. And the Police and Crime Commissioner hasn't stopped them in London. And the reason the Police and Crime Commissioner hasn't stopped them in London is because that person is Sadiq Khan, okay? And he should do that. They destroy the goodwill and peace of the West End. I've had callers on this show who had hospital appointments from far away. They couldn't take the train in from Sussex because they were scared of the people they would encounter on the train. They were old and vulnerable women, okay? And the other one saying, you know, I wanted a day out in the theatre, okay? I wanted to come to the West End, do a bit of shopping and go and see a play. But there was a hate march going on, so I thought I'd better stay at home. How sad is that? How sad is that? So I think the Police and Crime Commission should be a separate organisation. Okay, maybe it can be political, maybe it can be an electoral cycle in mid-term, right? Or maybe it can be a completely apolitical situation with an ex-policeman or a senior policeman of the current age. And I can think of someone who might stand for it and who might agree with me on this. And let's talk this through with Peter Bleksley. Merry Christmas, Peter. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. There's a lot to unpick in what you've said here, because we're talking about local authorities, local councils, however they're made up, whether that be a parish council that might have responsibility for the local swing park and other matters like that, right up to a unitary council such as the one that I live in, which is a large London suburb. So that whole local council thing is a mixture, and there's very little consistency. Then we factor in police and crime commissioners, which were elected in England and Wales back in the early days of the last Tory government, around about 2010, 2011. Then we throw in the fact that we've got metro mayors like Sadiq Khan in London and Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, who also have the roles as being police and crime commissioners. So the whole landscape is very complicated, but what I'd like to focus on is how do we hold our police accountable, and who should they be accountable to?
When we met the other night when we were out, you said to me that despite the fact that Sadiq Khan sacked Cressida Dick, the last Met Police Chief Officer, actually he may have been stepping out of line because actually that was the job of the then Home Secretary. So there's a situation of one man, two bosses here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that exists for police chiefs the length and breadth of the country. Not only are they ultimately answerable to the Home Secretary, but in the middle ground, they're responsible, or they're supposed to be accountable to, their local police and crime commissioner. And if we rewind some years to when Boris Johnson was the Mayor of London, it was in fact Boris Johnson that got rid of the then Met Commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, because they did not see eye to eye ideologically on many, many different things, despite them both being former Oxford University alumni. They fell out. Johnson had to win that battle to get Blair out of his job, which is exactly what he did. Very similar to the way in which Sadiq Khan got Cressida Dick out of her job, and trust me, she needed to go.
Yeah.
But how do we get effective, workable, efficient accountability of our police services? Because we need it. Policing is failing the length and breadth of the country in many, many regards. And when it fails us, it fails the brave men and women who are trying to do an impossible job on the front line to keep us safe.
Do you agree with me, Peter, that the consequence of this lack of governance, or perhaps this authoritarian governance, has been seen this year in the hate marches? There's little control of it. There's two-tier policing. The people who support basically the government position, those people with the placard saying Hamas are terrorists, which is a law of the land, they're being arrested. They face bail. They face public order charges. They're banned from Westminster intermittently, whereas the hate marchers are saying some really awful, nasty, pernicious, anti-Semitic comments and not really facing charges at all.
I'm a Londoner, and I travel to London on almost a daily basis, either for work or to watch my beloved Queen's Park Rangers at the weekend.
Yeah.
So I have seen countless numbers of these marchers on the trains, on the tubes, on the streets for over a year now. Some of them are what you would expect, the lentil-munching gardenistas who wrap one of those scarves around their neck and in their rampant naivety think that they want to live in some kind of ideological world. Then, of course, you have the spiteful, pernicious, vindictive, wicked people who would want to commit genocide on an entire race, faith of people, namely the Jewish people. And they are there filled with hate. We see it on their placards, we see it on their chants, and we've seen it in other actions that they've carried out. And what deeply, regrettably, has happened virtually since the 7th of October 2023, when these marches began not long after, is that the Metropolitan Police have shamefully appeased these people. There has, of course, been pressure brought upon them to act more robustly, to when they see that wicked sign calling for genocide, to arrest that person rather than taking their photograph and arresting them at some later stage. They didn't seem to do too much of that when the riots were on in the summer, did they? So consequently, when you appease people, when you appease lawbreakers, you simply empower them, and they become worse and they commit more serious crimes. And that, sadly, is what we've seen.
Pinned to the top of my X profile at the moment, Peter, is an interview with Mark Burbeck, who is from Our Fight UK, who has taken the personal obligation to be the change that he wanted to see and actually confronts the hate marchers. He's a non-Jewish guy who takes them on. He's facing charges of public order, but he is talking to the police, and he still says that he can make a breakthrough. The police just aren't trained or understand that actually it's not just about keeping the peace, it's about recognising, without being political, who are the real threat out there on the streets. And it's the majority of these people, isn't it?
Yes, and the police are also poorly trained in terms of what evidence they need to gather to fit a particular offence, so that it reaches a threshold whereby that person could be arrested. The police are also gripped by fear that if they make instant interventions there and then, they dive into a crowd, arrest someone, remove them promptly, swiftly, efficiently, and cart them off to be charged, that there will be an escalation in the bad behaviour of the marchers, and that they feel they will be held responsible for making a bad situation even worse. Well, my answer to that is, dear Metropolitan Police senior leadership, grow a spine. Do not allow people to chant genocidal chants. Do not allow people to wave banners and hold placards up that call for the extermination of a particular race, faith of people. Act properly, act consistently, consistently. That's what people want to see. Because, of course, we have expressions that are so familiar to us now. For example, two-tier policing.
Yeah.
They see one march being policed in one manner, and then they see another march being policed completely differently. And it sows a lot of discontent.
This is the home of common sense, and you've just heard it in spades from Peter Bleksley. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, and a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you. Always good to speak to Peter Bleksley. We're going to take a short break right here on Talk. Stay tuned. We're going to go to Cardiff. We're going to talk about Welsh politics. We're going to talk about darts and snooker. We're going to talk about the late Terry Griffiths, who was buried this week. Stay tuned to Talk.
Heard from young people saying they can't afford the rail tickets to get to see their families.
The rail fares, well, we've just nationalised the railways. The very first
but the fares aren't coming down, are they?
So they will once the franchises return to public ownership. So that's a pretty big.
That is not my understanding, but okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a very good morning to you. Happy Boxing Day. My name is Jonny Gould. I'm here till 12:30. Jim Arbuthnot. Morning to you, Jim. You've tweeted, you've got me going talking about politics of the country at the moment. Every time I hear a Tory interviewed, writes Jim, I'm more convinced that Nigel Farage is right to rule out any kind of joining forces with them, especially on immigration and the European Court of Human Rights. Loving the show, Jim. I'm loving you being there. Thank you very much indeed. And this is a moment of history because I reckon during this show, the Reform UK membership could very well overtake that of the Conservatives. At last count, the Conservatives had 131,680. The Reform UK bunch have 131,443, which means they are about 237 members behind the Tories. So it does look like during this show, the Reform will have more members than the Conservative Party. Let's go to the lines before we speak to Marcus Stead in Cardiff. Let's speak to Pat. Hello, Pat. Morning to you. Merry Christmas.
Oh, good. Merry Christmas to you, John.
Thank you, Pat.
Johnny. And a Happy New Year.
And a Happy New Year to you.
Right, well, the stumbling block, and as I see it, is that it doesn't matter how many. They could have 2 million members. Well, they could mop up most of the country's votes. But it's the civil servants and the unions that would put brick walls in front of any Reform government.
Have you noticed what Trump did in 2016? I mean, there were literally empty office buildings in Washington as he pledged to clean the swamp. So I think there would be a battle on the public sector starting with Whitehall, Pat, and I don't think it would be very pretty to look at either.
No. Look, probably 90% of the civil service is left-wing. And obviously the unions, not as powerful as they used to be, but still are forming the side of any government. And it's not... I mean, all these people, listen, I'm going to vote for Reform, I'm going to do this, I'm going to... if the Conservatives do whatever, it doesn't matter. You've got to reform the civil service. You've got to drain out the civil service, and you've got to make the unions weak before any right-wing government can flourish in this country.
Yeah, Pat, this is a very important point. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, there is a lot about the generations of wokery which have taken over our establishments. It's been voted through the card in the United States, and you just wonder whether Farage might get that through and over the line and create a bit of an electoral revolution in this country come the next election. 0344 499 1000. We're going to go to Cardiff now and talk to an old friend of mine and someone who covers major stories out there, one of the chief writers of the Glamorgan Star, who has his finger on the pulse of stories in Cardiff and in darts and snooker. We say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to Marcus Stead. Morning to you.
Good morning, Johnny. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Hanukkah.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. It's nice to see you, nice to speak to you. Is that a Christmas jumper you've got on there?
The nearest I've got to one. I looked through my drawer last night thinking what to wear. I haven't got one of those Noel Edmonds in the 1980s ones, but this is what I wear, to the works Christmas do, that sort of thing. It's as good as it gets, I'm afraid.
Very, very placid indeed. Well done, Marcus. Don't adjust your TV sets. You don't need to. Marcus, when we spoke last week, when we were teeing this up, you talked about some of the immigration problems that came into Cardiff and that buildings were being used without the consent of locals, and that the local population was concerned about rising crime in the area.
Yes, Johnny, this is something that Talk, the home of common sense, has been pushing for several weeks now, particularly with Kevin O'Sullivan and Isabel Oakeshott. Well, Isabel, Talk's international editor, came down to Cardiff Bay, and what's happened is there's what the council's describing as a migrant village has been built on an old gasworks near the IKEA site. Now, the reason I'm particularly interested in this, Johnny, is it's about a 5-minute walk from where I am right now, so I can provide quite a good insight into what the realities of the situation are. Now, the situation is this. The Cardiff Council used emergency powers during the pandemic to build what look like, well, first of all, there's 2 of them which look like student accommodation blocks, fairly high rise. And then there's several hundred what look like sort of holiday chalet prefab sort of places, a caravan park, but not by the sea, if you know what I mean. And what's happened is that the tower blocks have been filled with people. A lot of the chalets have not. And when Isabel went down there, she rightly saw that in the car parks and so forth, these are cars. There were Jaguars, Mercedes, BMWs. These are not people who are badly off. And there are big, big questions as to who is exactly there. And Isabel sent Cardiff Council a list of questions she wanted answering. And they sent a very sort of snide, woke, long statement. Kevin read it out in full on his show. I've got it in front of me now. It would take me too long to read the whole thing out now. But it was going on about, we are a proud multicultural city. Well, I believe in multiracialism. But multiculturalism is something different, where, you know, people, different races, different faiths, no problem at all.
I think we both believe in pluralism, as in many of our viewers and listeners do too, as opposed to multiculturalism. Right. Yeah, everyone together under a British idea of freedoms and values.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can have many races, many faiths, but there has to be something that unites us together, a united set of values and so forth. And I say this, Johnny, I'm living among one of the oldest Muslim communities in Britain, and they've been here since before World War I, and they're very well integrated. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, they were small in number to begin with. And there's a limit to how many people you can assimilate at any one time. And secondly, they knew the deal at the time. You're welcome to come here, you're welcome to practice your faith, but you are expected to live according to Welsh and British laws and cultural norms. And here we are, 4 or 5 generations in, and this is a well-integrated Muslim community. But something that's separate from what's going on here now with this these chalets. The Cardiff Council's being very virtuous about it. It's costing tens of millions of pounds. They're making a big thing. The whole site is net zero. They got the heat pumps, we got the solar panels. Well, they're all things I can't afford on my properties, you know. Most of the people listening, I can't afford a BMW or a Jaguar or the sort of cars I see there. So what I'm getting at, and this is what Kevin and Isabel are working on, what really is going on that site? Now, we know the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee. An asylum seeker is somebody who comes here. A refugee is somebody whose case has been processed. Yeah. We're being told that this is for homeless people and for refugees. Well, for a start, 2-3 miles down the road at what used to be the Copthorne Hotel, it was in the late 80s, early 90s, at the height of luxury. They haven't decorated it for a long time. It's looking like a bit of an early 90s time warp there now. Yes. That's been full of migrants for well over a year. Yeah, it's very, very disappointing, and it does upset society, and these things need to be tackled, and they're not being so. You went to the funeral this week of Terry Griffiths. We all remember him as the Llanelli postman who shocked the snooker world by winning the title from nowhere in 1979. We miss him. Johnny, Terry Griffiths led an absolutely extraordinary life. I mean, he turned professional at the age of 30, a year before he won the world title in 1979. Amazing. Yeah, his funeral was absolutely packed the other day. We had Steve Davis, Dennis Taylor, Stephen Hendry, Mark Williams are all there to pay their respects. And Terry's story was one. He left school at 15. He used to get about 3:30 every morning to get a train to work a shift at a coal mine. First of all, he was above ground, removing the waste from coal coming up. Then he would go underground as he got a little bit older. There was some very big tragedies there. People lost their lives, some of his colleagues did. And then he would finish a shift at 3:30, go home, go to bed soon after, and then start again the next day. And as the years went on, he took jobs as a postman, an insurance salesman, a blacksmith's apprentice, and turned professional in 79. Had that wonderful 1:50 a.m. finish in the semi-final against Eddie Charlton. David Vine put a microphone in front of him. Terry said, "I'm in the final now," you know, in that accent of his. And you know, that there was a huge humbleness about Terry Griffiths. It never went to his head. And he also gave something back. This is very important. He opened the Terry Griffiths Matchroom Club in Llanelli in the late 1980s. Have you lost my... No, I'm still there, but we haven't got long, and it's a lovely story. And Marcus, time has beaten us, so thank you very much for paying that lovely tribute to Terry Griffiths. And he speaks of an age which I think still exists in snooker. It's still a lovely and popular sport. A very good morning to you. My name is Jonny Gould. This is Talk. And in the coming hour, we're going to talk to Cormac Smith about the terrible goings-on in Russia and Ukraine. And we're going to talk sport as well with Sam Sport-Stevens.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a very good boxing morning to you. My name is Jonny Gould and I'm here until 12:30, and then we hand over the reins to Talk Sport for a packed afternoon of sport, football and racing lead the way. And it's been a terrific show to start. If you've missed any of it, you can scroll back on YouTube and watch it live as well. If you missed the interviews with Peter Bleksley talking a great amount of common sense about policing across the country. If you want to talk about Marcus Stead's views, Anna McGovern's newspaper reviews, scroll back and enjoy that. But we've got some great guests coming up this hour as well. In just a moment, we'll talk to Cormac Smith, former communications advisor to the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, about the war in Russia and Ukraine, which is continuing unabated through this wicked winter. 500,000 people have been left without heating in Kharkiv as Putin's forces launched a barrage of aerial attacks on Ukraine. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And Sam Stevens is here to talk about this packed afternoon of sport ahead. And Jonathan Sacher-Doty will talk about the 20th of January this year, not just my missus' birthday, but the return of Donald Trump to the White House. Maybe I can avoid giving her a present this year. There you go. Donald Trump's in the White House. Happy birthday, love. Not sure how well that'll go down. Anyway, just had that thought. Just thinking off the top of my head, 0344 499 1000. Now, this has come from Neil. Good morning, Neil. Johnny, there's a lot of arrogance among Reform voters. They might not want a pact with the Tories, but the fact is that there are many Conservatives who will never vote for Farage. If that remains the case, then all that would happen is the right will give Starmer another electoral win, and that appears to have been the case this year with this loveless landslide, as it's called, when Keir Starmer romped to a huge majority in Parliament as well. 0344 499 1000. Dean from Dagenham has tweeted as well, this public school thing about the public school industry might be going bankrupt because of these ridiculous VAT rules which have come in on school fees, which mean that state school children will be moved up from private schools. 3,000 children will be taken out of private schools immediately, and they will need a state place before the end of the academic year. Campaigners against the change say that some parents will be unable to afford a huge rise of 20% VAT, given that some private schools are preparing to pass on the costs in full. Quite simply, if they didn't pass on the VAT costs, they would go bankrupt. What is the margin on public school education? Well, I wouldn't imagine it's 20%. Would you? 0344 499 1000. As mentioned before, 500,000 people have been left without heating in Kharkiv as President Putin's forces launched a barrage of aerial attacks on Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, says it's inhumane. The strikes wounded at least 6 people in the city of Kharkiv and killed 1 in the region of Dnipro, local governors have said. And I find this particular attack on Christmas Day particularly pernicious because there's a message here from Putin. And it's not just that it's on Christmas Day, that it's last year. Volodymyr Zelensky said the Orthodox Christmas, of which the Ukrainians are largely an Orthodox Christian group like the Russians, we're moving our Christmas celebrations from January the 6th, the Orthodox Christmas, to the Western Christian idea of Christmas on December the 25th. So Putin said, well, if this is your new holy day, bam, take this. And I think that is the mark of the man. The mark of Putin. 0344 499 1000. Former communications advisor to Foreign Ministry of Ukraine is with us. Cormac Smith. Morning, Cormac. How are you doing?
Johnny, good morning. Would you allow me to start by wishing you and all the crew there a very happy Christmas and also a happy Hanukkah for any of our Jewish friends?
Thank you, Cormac. Thank you very much indeed. This war in Ukraine, I mean, it's bitterly cold there. It's going to get even colder in the new year. And this wicked attack by Russia on Ukraine on their new Christmas has sent a particularly pernicious message, in my opinion.
Johnny, yes, and I would agree with every single word you said just before I came on. I was on an interview, I was called onto an interview on another channel first thing yesterday morning, and the word I used was spiteful. And if there's one message that people need to get after all the Russian lies about, it was Ukraine is full of Nazis and it was NATO expansion that caused the invasion. This is, Putin believes that Ukraine is a false country. He has no respect for the Ukrainian people. He wants to wipe Ukraine and Ukraine's culture off the face of the earth. And the fact that this has been done Christmas Day, the season of goodwill, is absolutely, it's spiteful. It's also criminal. It's against it is a war crime to attack, they are attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure with highly precise weaponry. They know exactly what they're doing. It's an attempt to hurt and to break the will of the Ukrainian people. And I think that's the message that I really want to get across to any listeners today, to finally realize what we are dealing with in this horrendous, criminal, kleptocratic regime that Putin leads in the Kremlin at the moment.
Ukraine is not as big as Russia. Putin is letting his Russian soldiers be slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands. He's pulling these poor kids out of places thousands of miles from Moscow, so they are collateral damage. They're of no emotional concern to him, and indeed most of Russia, because it's the world's biggest country. It is a wicked war on both sides. And now, as you've seen in our pictures as they cross on TV, Donald Trump goes back to the White House. Is this war being increased ahead of negotiations which Trump must have already begun between the parties?
I think there is no doubt that Putin is sending a message to Donald Trump. He is escalating. He is trying to set himself up in the most powerful position. There's an old truism, my real education began in 2014 when I started getting invited to former communist countries to work with people on government communications. I then went to Ukraine in 2016 for 2 years to work with the foreign minister. And, the one thing that we have to realize is, as a very good friend who I spoke to yesterday said to me right at the beginning of this horrible war, if Ukraine stops fighting, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. So my hope for a Donald Trump presidency, and if I, betray my own politics, if there's one area and one area alone that I agree with Donald Trump, it's that we in the European members of NATO have not been paying our fair dues. And if we allow Putin to win in Ukraine, Putin will not stop in Ukraine. I've been trying to tell the world this since 2016, since I worked at the heart of the Ukrainian government. So my hope is, if Trump were to pull all support away from Ukraine and away from Europe, it would be very, very hard, if not impossible, for Europe to stand up to the plate immediately. But we can, what a lot of European leaders must do is show the willingness, and our people also, because we are democracies, to make the sacrifices to spend more money on defence. The only country which is approaching 5% of its GDP on defence at the moment is Poland. The 3 Baltic states are up around 3.5%, and the 2 new NATO members of Finland and Sweden are around 2.5%. As you know, we're at about 2.3% here. We hope to get to 2.5%, but as many of our existing and our current and former generals and diplomats will tell us, if we don't get this right now, it is going to cost us so much more tomorrow. So that's my hope, that we can keep Trump and America involved. But I'm very clear the price for that will be a real commitment from European leaders to spend more money on defence, because we have to.
And Cormac, the price is Crimea, because the world didn't stop Putin when he invaded Crimea in 2014. And even before that, in 2008, during the Beijing Olympics, when he had a proper war with Georgia, it's so obvious what he's been doing over the last 20 years. And countries like Moldova must be worried. Belarus is already a satellite state of this kind of new Soviet Union. Poland, Finland, Sweden. You know, if we don't stop Putin, we don't have to look far back in our European history to know what happens.
You know, I've been, you know, again, as I said, my education started around 2014, really took off in 2016 when I went to work with Ukraine's foreign minister, and I penned an op-ed, which is still online in The Guardian, in early 2017 with Pavlo Klimkin. And the headline is, Putin will not stop at Ukraine in his desire to put the Russian Empire back together. This is an old-fashioned war of imperial conquest. And you're quite right with what you said. You know, population-wise, Russia is probably 3.5 times the size of Ukraine. And again, I have been saying from the very start, even I started doing interviews a month before the full-scale invasion. And I've been saying to people that Putin will have no compunction with pouring tens of thousands of his own people into the meat grinder, and indeed murdering tens of thousands, as he has already done. You know, Mariupol, nobody knows how many died in Mariupol in early 2022, but conservative estimates are around 25,000 in 3 months. The Nazis killed 20,000 in 2 years in Mariupol. So I just believe, you know, we are waking up slowly. And I have, you know, been a professional communicator all my life. I love my sound bites. And I've been trying to tell people that, you know, it really is our money and guns today or our daughters and sons tomorrow.
God forbid.
I believe that, Johnny.
God forbid, Cormac, and I hear you. And just to the border of Russia, one of its many, many borders is Turkey, who have effectively kicked Russia up the bum in Syria. Russia are sort of on the retreat in Syria. However, they've effectively taken Assad hostage, if you like. He's not allowed to leave Moscow. We believe his missus wants a divorce and come back to Acton or Chiswick, wherever she lived in the past. She married the wrong guy, that's for sure. And they are allies, but they're also imperial rivals. Turkey now are kind of in charge in Syria. They threaten the Iranian land bridge. But what could Turkey's growing regional influence have on Russia? Erdogan is suddenly an international player.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. I mean, in many ways, Erdogan is a, you know, hard right autocrat. And that is certainly against the values which we hold dear in the West. But Turkey is also a member of NATO. So, you know, in this very, very difficult game of realpolitik, our leaders need to find a way to make sure that Turkey stays absolutely on our side. The other thing I'd say, commenting on what you just said, Russia is far weaker at the moment than Putin would like us to believe. They are losing, you talked about the losses, they're losing probably on average 1,500 men per day in Ukraine at the moment.
Wow.
To put that in context, there are days when the figures which are coming out of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense are suggesting 2,000 Russian casualties in a 24-hour period. And what I always say, to put that in context, the Soviet Union in Afghanistan over 10 years lost 15,000. And I know because I befriended a man, he was the father of a colleague of mine who was a colonel in the Soviet army as a Ukrainian, obviously, back and fought in the 70s. And he told me stories of how horrendous that war was. But to put it in context, Russia is losing as many men in maybe 10 days now as the USSR was losing in 10 years in Afghanistan. The Russian economy is in free fall at the moment. People are spending 50 to 60% of their income on food. People are stealing butter from shops. Butter is being put into secure containers. and in the West, I think that we fear soundbite again, if you'll excuse me. We really risk snatching defeat from the jaws of victory now. If there was ever a time for the Western alliance, and Britain has, as you know, we have been at the absolute forefront of that, not just in what we have given Ukraine and the training of Ukrainian soldiers, but in the great leadership. And I've been told this by Ukrainian diplomats over the last 3 years, and the great leadership that Britain has shown around Europe to encourage other European nations to step up and support Ukraine. But it really is, I believe we are at a critical point at the moment. Trump, it's beyond my ability to predict what Trump will do, but I do believe that there is a deal to be done with Trump, but I think he can be kept in the game, I hope. But the price for that will be European countries, including the UK, spending a lot more money on defence. And believe me, Johnny, if we are to let Putin have victory in Ukraine, it will cost us so much more tomorrow.
The World War II settlement is over. The complacency, the decline in our armed forces, the amount of numbers of people is shocking. We are, God forbid, invadable. And I don't believe national security is as big an issue for this government as perhaps it should be. And I'm pointing to something that was said in Parliament a few days ago when a Tory opposition backbencher said to Annalisa Dodds, are you going to write to the Oxford Union about that debate? I put debate in inverted commas, and it turned into an absolute frenzy of hate against the 4 pro-Israel debaters about the conduct of the people who were supposedly the audience, but actually were an Islamist bunch who was shouting at the 4 people. And Annalisa Dodds was saying, instead of, yes, I will write to them about this because the Oxford Union is a much loved institution and should be protected. Actually, what she just said was anti-Semitism is something we won't tolerate. So in other words, they'll stick up the banner, they'll say what they won't tolerate, but when something, God forbid, is attacked or burned down, they'll just keep saying that. That is an issue of national security. That is a fault line for me. And I really detected that, Cormac. I'm worried for our security.
Well, look, Johnny, I agree with you. There's a couple of things that I would say. One, when we have division in our societies, such as the horrendous rise in anti-Semitism at the moment, always look for Russia's fingerprints in this, because one of the things that we've been saying for years that leaders in the West need to better understand is the nature of Russian hybrid warfare, or sometimes called grey zone warfare. And this will sometimes be kinetic, i.e. conventional violence, as is being used in Ukraine at the moment. But more often it will be agent provocateur, it will be provoking division in our societies. It will be cyber attacks. It will be interference in elections. The list goes on and on, all aimed at dividing us and weakening us and sowing dissent in our nation. And, to conclude what you said, the first duty of any government is the protection of the realm. Now, again, I'll betray my own politics, which I can do now as a former civil servant. There was an awful lot about the domestic policies of the last government that I personally wasn't happy with. But I was so proud of the position which the UK took. And I'm an Irishman, but an Irishman that's lived in this country for 37 years. I was so proud of the position that we took supporting Ukraine. I hear all the warm words from our current government. I have yet to see the proof. And you are talking about the difference between words and deeds, about talking the talk or actually walking the walk. So, I am not going to say anything to condemn our current government at the moment. I wait in hope. But, I would quote, I think it was General Sir Roland Walker, who said recently, the British Army is not ready to fight And if we're not ready to fight, we're not ready to deter. And that's Britain who has been at the forefront. So, yes, we really need to step up in this country. And unfortunately, there is a price to that, because if we pay more for defence, we are going to have to pay less elsewhere. And again, I don't know where that is. I can only speak for myself as a person who lives here and a taxpayer here. Personally, I'm willing to pay more tax, and I'm willing to see my standard of living squeezed, because I think, and that's not because I'm not a rich man or I'm not some great hero or anything. I've realized that it is this important, and people need to open their eyes and see what the real consequences will be if we don't do it today. As I said, our money and guns today, our daughters and sons tomorrow.
Without national security, nothing is possible. I think that's the message, loud and clear. Cormac Smith.
100%.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Former Communications Advisor to the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine. Cormac Smith, 0344 499 1000. We'll go to the lines. Plenty of you engaged and calling in. Stay tuned to talk. We'll speak to George in Derby, and then Mary in Hemel Hempstead, and then over and above that, Sam Stevens will be talking sport as we approach the moment when Reform UK's membership will outdo that of the Conservatives. It's going to happen during this show on Talk. Stay tuned.
We're in a Shamima Begum kind of situation, aren't we? Voluntarily marrying into a monstrous regime, just as Shamima Begum did with ISIS. Now, we set a fairly clear legal precedent. And actually, when you look at what's been uncovered in Syria since the Assad regime fell, the horrors of the prison, the mass graves, and the general abuses that the Assad regime inflicted on the people of Syria. I mean, this is clearly someone that we don't want back in the UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Something phenomenal has happened in British politics over the last 30 seconds. I can tell you, breaking news. that Reform UK's total membership has now exceeded that of the Conservative Party for the first time ever. There are now 131,721 Reform UK voters. Of the Tories, there are 131,680, and that means that there are 52 more Reform UK voters than there are Tories. The last Conservative membership tally was recorded 6 weeks or so ago, but nevertheless, Reform UK are undergoing a bit of a membership revolution. We're going to try and talk to someone high up in the Reform UK party before the end of the show at 12:30. Stay tuned to talk. But right now, your opinions count too. Let's speak to George in Derby. Morning to you, George.
Hello, mate. It's nice to talk to you.
Harry, happy Christmas, George.
Thank you. You too. So I'm a Conservative Party member, and I'm just so angry with this Reform Party. If you add up the votes from the last election, Tories and Reform got about 1.7 million or something like that. The Labour Party got about 9.5. So there's a 1.2 million majority. And we face exactly the same scenario again the next time, unless Reform either back off or do a deal with the Tories. And it makes me so angry because we are with this disgusting government. And we can't allow these parties, Reform particularly in Farage, to put their party and their interest before the country. And that's what Reform's doing. They're a protest vote, in my view. I think they've reached a high water mark of about 4 million votes. As one of your earlier callers said, there's a lot of people like me that just will never vote Reform. Farage I wouldn't even buy a car off that guy.
So hang on, George. What are your objections? Okay, is it a trust issue, or is it an issue of that you feel that they're a little bit tasty, populist, nationalistic? What is your issue if you're a traditional Tory party voter and indeed member? What is your resistance to perhaps what some people might say about Reform is that they are the traditional Tories?
Well, my first resistance is just one of math. You know, if we had a proportional system, then sure, we'd have a Tory Reform coalition now, and great, I'll buy it. So that's the first thing. And I think it's, honestly, with respect, and my youngest brother argues about this, respect to people who vote whatever they want to vote, but I think it's idiotic. I think it's idiotic, given the maths in our political system, to vote Reform. So aside from that, I can't stand Farage. I'm pro-Brexit, so I share a lot of his politics, but I think he's just smarmy. He's weird. Richard Tice as well. They're just weird. And they're a single-issue party. They need to broaden. They need to start talking about other things.
Hang on, personality-wise, what's weird about him? I mean, he talks a lot of sense. I mean, let's take... What's weird about... I mean, he talks a lot of sense. He's knowledgeable about an enormous amount of things. He's got a grasp of history, Farage, which a lot of the other leaders of this time, bar Boris Johnson, don't seem to have. What's weird about him? That he likes a pint or laughs a lot? What is it?
No, I'd go for a pint with him, no problem. I think it'd be a real laugh. Look, I'm stood here in the field with my dog and my barber wellies, but what I see in Farage is that kind of dyed-in-the-wool, barber-wearing, kind of cigar smoke. He's so unpolished, and I'm not saying I want to Blairite, but he just comes across as so... I don't know. There's nothing. I don't. He's just, to me, he's a protest vote.
Right.
He just is. He doesn't come across as the full package.
Okay.
I don't trust him, and I don't know if they had a smart, polished leader, someone like Robert Jenrick, who I voted for. I didn't vote for Kenny. Then I think they would do much better, and I think they could probably extend their membership even further if they had someone like him. But he's a Marmite character, isn't he, Farage?
Okay, yeah. George from Derby doesn't like the cut of Nigel's jib, or indeed his cloth. So, George, thank you very much for your call today. Mary in Hemel Hempstead, good morning, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
And to you as well.
How are we doing?
I totally disagree with the previous speaker.
That's what we like.
As far as I'm concerned, he's more in contact with the people in the country. I've been a Tory voter for about 60 years.
Right.
And quite frankly, I think Nigel is a breath of fresh air. I'm tired of the same old faces, the same old promises, the same old politics. I want something new for my children and my grandchildren. And to me, Nigel gives that. 3 of us in our family have joined Reform. I was a member of the Brexit Party before that. I was a member of UKIP before that. And for even any consideration that Nigel should join forces with the Tories, why would he do that when he's doing very well on his own?
Tell me, George from Derby might have a point here about him being a little bit trustworthy. You say you were a member of the Reform now, then before that Brexit and UKIP. Is there not a little clue in there that perhaps he's just sort of following the consensus, this sort of change of names, just to sort of get with the headlines? Are you a bit worried about that he might say anything to get into power? Are you worried about that?
Well, not particularly, because, for example, take Brexit, for example.
Mm-hmm.
He was a lone voice. He's been speaking about that for years. He wasn't, he started from scratch with that. He wasn't what you might call following a path or a pattern then, what was a possible sort of popular decision, because he was a lone voice in the wilderness. It was him who raised the fact about all the boats that were coming over from the continent. They were not discussed. We didn't really know much about it. He opened up that debate. He had films of him showing the boats in the channel. This was all covered up by this government and the last government, and it's been going on really since the immigrants kept pouring in since Blair opened the gates. But we were never really told the true facts about it. But the thing with Kemi, what disappointed me with her, I was sort of thought, well, maybe they had a chance with her. But when the farmers were protesting in Westminster, you would have thought, with all the noise that there was up there, she would have gone in and she would have tackled Starmer about the farmers. And she talked about immigration.
She didn't, did she? She didn't. The PMQs is her weekly advert, Mary. Are you disappointed that she's not made the impact that you perhaps were expecting?
Well, no, I think I'm not really surprised. I just thought that maybe she might, but I'm not disappointed because it's just more of the same, I'm afraid, I'm concerned.
Well, Mary, that really is a vote for Farage and the Reform Party, because they do talk differently.
Yes, exactly, and I'm hoping that they do. I mean, for years, Nigel has been saying himself that we don't need to follow everything like the ECHR tells us to do.
Yeah.
Continent ignore it in a lot of places. Germany has. I mean, Germany's sent people back to Afghanistan.
Yes, they have. Mary from Hemel Hempstead, thank you. And yet the latest poll has the Tories just ahead of Reform in the polls. It's like 24, 23, 22. So we're going to have a kind of hung parliament, or are we? In the first past the post system, it does advantage the two big parties, the Labour and Tories. Can Farage break that 03444991000? What I can tell you is that the Reform UK membership is exceeding the Conservatives. The breaking news is that they've done it during this show, and in just a moment we're going to talk to the chairman of Reform UK about what must be a very momentous day for him, for Nigel Farage, for Richard Tice, and for the rest of the Reform UK leadership. Join Zia Yusuf after this short break on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
A momentous day in British politics, or is it? We'll find out now, because Reform UK's membership has now exceeded that of the Conservative Party. The latest toll is 131,861 to the Tories' 131,680. That means they have 180 more members than the Tory party. So let's talk to the chairman of Reform UK. Joining us live, it's Zia Yusuf. Hello, Zia.
Good morning.
Many congratulations to you. This must be a huge day of celebration.
Thank you, but the congratulations go to the millions of Reform supporters across the country, obviously the 132,000 members who have joined us. And but make no mistake, this is a historic moment. As Nigel has just tweeted out, the youngest political party in British politics has just overtaken the oldest political party in the world in terms of members. And we're just getting started. The general election was just 7 months ago, and the party has been professionalising rapidly. To give you an idea of the pace of growth here, a year ago, the party was at 8% in the polls and had 15,000 members. Today, we're polling at an average of 23%, and we have almost 132,000 members. We've done that in a year. So imagine where we're going to be in another year and a year after that. This is a historic time in Britain. The two-party stranglehold that has existed, this duopoly of the two old parties that has had British people within its grip for the last century, is finally being broken, and I think that's an extraordinary thing.
Now, one of the reasons, perhaps, that Reform are escalating at this time is not just the professionalisation, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but it's also the fact that perhaps people were critical of Nigel Farage at the last election when Boris Johnson was elected over Jeremy Corbyn, is that he blinked and he kind of refused to put Reform or Brexit Party candidates in constituencies which Boris Johnson could win and create the parliamentary majority he needed to win. But this time, you've not blinked. You've got 5 MPs, but it would still take an enormous wave for you to convert 5 seats into 350 seats, when actually you're only second in 89 seats around the country.
Well, all of that data you've just given me is around 7 months old. And
right.
You know, the party only had around 40,000 members, for example, at that time. And look, nobody is more aware than Nigel and the rest of the MPs and every Reform supporter listening to this, and frankly, even people who don't yet support us, who feel incredibly betrayed by Boris Johnson, what he did with that 80-seat majority. As Kemi Badenoch admits, you know, they talked right and governed left. They unleashed one of the most catastrophic immigration and border policies this country has ever seen. Many of the problems we see in this country, frankly, are down to the betrayal of the Tory party. So that is one key driver of our growth. But I'll tell you what I believe is the primary driver of Reform's growth. Talking to our supporters across the country, it is one of optimism. The primary driver is that people finally, amidst this dystopian Keir Starmer government and all the awful things and the hardship that is being inflicted on the British people, they actually see that there is hope. And yes, going from 5 MPs to 326 in one fell swoop would be an extraordinary thing. But don't underestimate where we are now in the polls. This is where the first past the post system stops being a headwind and becomes a tailwind. If once we get to 32%, we have a majority. And we're not far off now from getting there, around 8 percentage points. We've gone from 15% to 23% in 6.5 months. So make no mistake, history is being made. We have an incredible team. We have all of the momentum in British politics and all of the factors and drivers that have gotten the country to where it is today, this awful state, and all of those factors simultaneously that have driven Reform's rise. Not only are those not going to get better, they're going to get worse at an alarming rate. You know, whether it's energy bills continuing to rocket through the roof because of Mad Ed's insane obsession with net zero, whether it's the immigration policy, which remains totally, essentially still open borders. The boats are coming at a faster rate on a daily basis under this Keir Starmer government than even the catastrophic Tory government. Or law and order. We still obviously have nowhere near enough prison space. The two-tier policing problem has continued to get worse. And, of course, anyone who has tried to get a GP or dentist appointment, or indeed gone to accident and emergency, will know the disastrous state that our NHS is in. So people see in reform an opportunity here. They see rays of sunshine, essentially, and a silver lining to this, which is that just as has happened in the United States, where people really feel like there is a new dawn brewing, that's what we're going to be able to deliver for people in Britain. And it will only be a party from without the system that can deliver that.
Right,
the people who came from within the system and owe their existence to the system will never be able to bring the change this country needs.
I mentioned professionalisation, and you talk about the first past the post system, which was no doubt an impediment to your electoral chances this year, and you're saying that it'll be a tailwind, and yet it's more than just that. That is the bricks and mortar membership around the country. There are Conservative clubs around the country, and in order to professionalise, you need a Reform membership club in Derby or in, Ipswich, in Edinburgh, in Cornwall. You need a local office, just like they have, for example, in Eastbourne, where there's a Liberal Democrat office, there's a Conservative office, because they flip between each other so much. There's almost a case of two MPs there at all times, the way it's swung either way. You need that, and you haven't got that yet. That is a monumental building facility that's required, isn't it, Zia? That literally can't be done overnight.
Well, that's where I've spent the majority of my time as chairman, actually, since the general election, is building that infrastructure. We now have over 400 branches across the country. You can go to our website, look up, find your branch, enter your postcode or your address, and it'll show you where your nearest one is and how to get in touch to go to your local meeting. Absolutely. We are building a ground campaign infrastructure. By the time we get to the Scottish and Wales elections in 2026, we will have a pretty formidable ground campaign machine. And by the general election, we will have the most sophisticated and impactful and effective ground campaigning infrastructure in the country. So, yes, it's a tall order. We're clear-eyed about that. But to give you a sense of the momentum behind this and how people seem to have no idea the speed at which things can be built in the modern era. It was only on Christmas Eve, that the Telegraph, when we pushed our tracker live with 118,000 members, said that they expected us to surpass the Tory membership at some point in the next month. Now, technically, that's correct. We've done it inside 2.5 days, obviously. We've added over 13,000 members inside 3.5 days. Now, that, again, is unprecedented. So, look, we've got no shortage of willing volunteers across the country. They're incredible, patriotic people who love their country and want to help. We're building the infrastructure as we speak. You're right. It is going to be a huge challenge, but generally saving a country is such a challenging thing, and we're all up for that.
Zia Yusuf, congratulations. Many thanks indeed for joining us. That is the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf, who came on the show just now with the breaking news that Reform UK have now exceeded membership of the Tory party. They're approaching 132,000 members. The Conservatives, 131,680. Are you tempted, as a former Tory voter, to vote Reform, given that he says this is a revolution in thinking to save the country? Are these big words that can be translated into real action? Are you still cynical? Are you still worried about elements of the Reform UK manifesto and party that make you think, well, I am a traditional Tory or indeed Labour voter that might stick to my guns with the main party? Or is it time that the two-party system was thrown on its head? 0344 499 1000. We're going to go racing and football next after this short break. They're looking through the window to see if I'm all right. I'm just doing an impression of a jockey. Stay tuned to talk.
You've got to, obviously, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day? And we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say, deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A warm welcome to your bank holiday if you've just switched on. This is Jonny Gould. I'm here for another 40 minutes or so, and then we hand over the reins to Talk Sport for their afternoon of action. But Boxing Day is the biggest and most congested day of sports news around. The calendar is absolutely vast. The Boxing Day test at the Melbourne Cricket Ground here in this country. Everton against Manchester City. City can't buy a win at the moment. Will Pep Guardiola be the manager even at the end of the season? Or is the fact that he's won 6 titles in the last 8 seasons enough to keep him? And horse racing, the UK sees a big day. King George VI chase at Kempton Park. And there's so much going on. Who better to talk than Sam Sport Stevens is on the line. Sam, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. How are you?
Yeah, very good, Johnny, my old mate. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Merry Christmas, Nate. Nice to see you. Nice to see your smiling face lighting up our Talk output once more. Should we start with the Premier League, where Manchester City keep on losing? It's like the Manchester City of the 90s. What's happened? They've literally collapsed. They're in 7th place. If someone had said at Christmas Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth would be above them in the Premier League, they'd want you to have a check-up from the neck up.
It's absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, I think since the start of November, they've got the worst record in the Premier League. We're talking about a team that has won everything over the last few years. I mean, Pep Guardiola, the greatest manager around, and all of a sudden they're 1 win in 12. It's a decline that I don't think anybody could have seen coming over the last few weeks. It's quite remarkable, and they have a game against Everton today at 12:30. That's a very winnable fixture for Manchester City any time. But is it today? They've been on such a rotten run that you would think that an Everton game at the Etihad would be an absolute home banker for them. But at the moment, it seems like a big struggle for them. I mean, Pep Guardiola's even got them coming in and sleeping at the training ground in order to try and turn their form around. So,
well, they've got like a dormitory. They've got a millionaire's dormitory.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm sure they're not roughing it. Let's be honest. I'm sure it was quite comfortable.
Not sleeping bags, then.
But yeah, exactly. But I mean, when is this form going to turn for them? It's truly amazing. And as you said, Johnny, I mean, if you'd looked into a crystal ball and someone had called this and Bournemouth and Forest to be above them in the table, I think people would have thought you'd gone mad at Christmas. But that is what we're looking at. We're looking at City now with the battle to try and even get into the top 4 at the end of the season. And as you said as well in your build-up here, Pep Guardiola's future's in question, which is just unbelievable.
Got to be. The thing about this is that the fault lines might have been there. He wasn't really active in the transfer market over the summer. and complacency above all. They thought Jurgen Klopp's leaving, you know, the new guy Arne Slot's coming from Dutch football. We all know what Erik ten Hag was doing at Manchester United. He got sacked, and yet Arne Slot has come in and literally slotted in like nature and taking Liverpool probably to the title. Chelsea might have a view on that as well. But the clues were there. Apart from a lack of transfers in the market, Kyle Walker looked a little bit over the hill during the World Cup, didn't he?
No question, and you look at their squad now and you think they're an ageing squad. I mean, there's Kyle Walker, Kevin De Bruyne is a year beyond his peak. You know, you look at Bernardo Silva, they've got plenty of other players as well who just don't look like they're quite where they were. Nobody could have, of course, legislated for that injury to Rodri, which has kept him out for the whole season, which is vital to them. I mean, he's undeniably, if not their best player, certainly their most important player in a key position, and that hasn't helped them at all. But, you know, you'd think with a squad like Manchester City's that they've built with millions spent on it, in fact, almost billions spent on it over the years, that they would be able to deal with an injury to one player, no matter how crucial. And yet it seems that it's completely folded like a pack of cards, isn't it? A house of cards at the moment for City. So it is absolutely bizarre. And as you say, you'd think that, according to the transfer window, that things were, you know, that felt obvious that they needed reinforcements. It may be that with the window opening again next week, they might have to dip into that and start to look at perhaps midfield and forward, or certainly maybe even defensive reinforcements for City at the moment. But the weird thing about Arne Slot, of course, he came in, didn't sign anybody. No. And yet Liverpool are flying high at the top of the table and look like they're about as good as anybody around at the moment, you know, in world football. So you never quite know what you're going to get in the Premier League. But I think City do look like they're a little bit tired, jaded. Perhaps they've been together that little bit too long. Perhaps Pep's words now are going in one ear and out the other, whereas before they were sort of, you know, waiting for every word. So it's a curious situation. It really is. But you would think that they would strengthen in the window on the ground.
They absolutely
they are now
need
miles
to.
off the pace.
It reminds me of the Rupert Holmes song, Pina Colada song. Maybe he was singing about Pep Guardiola. I was tired of my lady. We'd been together too long, like a worn-out recording of a favourite song. You know, Pep may be out of the door. Now, what other big Premier League fixtures are there today? What are the other standout ones we've got to worry about?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, Chelsea, as you mentioned them, they can go within a couple of points of Liverpool at the top if they beat Fulham this afternoon at 3 o'clock. That's a West London derby. You would think Chelsea would win that, but derby matches are always difficult to call. That would give Chelsea a real boost when it comes into looking ahead to the Christmas period and New Year as well, if they could win that. We've also got Forest against Spurs, which I think is a very exciting game. You look at where Nottingham Forest are on the table at the moment, ahead of Tottenham considerably and challenging for the European places. So that's a game that they will hope to win. And Ange Postecoglou, the Spurs manager, has faced a lot of criticism of late for playing this rather swashbuckling, rather sort of overly attacking style of football and not focusing on defending, and he's under a bit of pressure. So that's a game that Spurs will be desperate to avoid defeat in as well. And then you've got your lot, Johnny, Villa, on the way up to St James's Park. That's going to be a pretty good game this afternoon, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's an away win, don't you? I think Villa are in a little bit of form. We're only on the road. Only at home. On the road, we're struggling a little bit. But I look at Forest and Bournemouth, and I can't see them finishing anywhere near the top of the table come the end of the season. I think they will drift away. I think they are form clubs, and I think Villa are the real deal now.
I mean, there's no question that Villa are the real deal. What I would say about that, though, is that you look at some of these clubs like Villa who've got European football to contend with as well. It does make a big difference, you know. And you look at Villa's results post-Champions League games, it's been a bit of a struggle for them, and understandably, because, you know, the travails of playing a tough European game in midweek and then trying to play again in the league at the weekend. It's not easy. So I do take your point about Bournemouth and Forest, but at least they've got the sort of the 1 week, one game a week type thing, or at least they're only really focusing on league football. It's whether their squads are going to be deep enough when it comes to the business end of the season to last. But you would think with Villa, with Unai Emery, with the form you've been in, with the quality of players you've got, the quality of managers, that you'll certainly be there or thereabouts when it comes to the European positions towards the end of the season. And you can see that happening. But I think a win today against Newcastle, another European contender, would go a long way to sort of silencing any doubts there might be about whether or not European football is on the horizon for Villa this season.
A tough assignment for Aston Villa on the road. Now, of course, it's horse racing day. A huge amount of programmes going on, but it is led, of course, with the prestigious King George VI chase at Kempton Park.
Yes, tell us all about it, Johnny. You're an expert at the old horse racing.
Am I?
Well, more so than me.
Oh, no. What are we going to do?
King George V.
I was rather hoping... It's actually King George VI.
Is it?
Yeah, I've literally asked you the wrong question there, haven't I?
You're asking a horse racing expert who isn't an expert, unfortunately. You need to find Rupert Bell, a horse racing man. He'll tell you all about that.
He'll talk too much about Harry and Meghan at this moment. You know, might just get all confused.
Yeah, true. I know it's a big day of horse racing today, though. Have you ever been on Boxing Day? It's not
I have been to the King George VI, and it's a wonderful spectacle, a wonderful occasion. Horse racing is such a deep and exciting sport with such a huge tradition. It is one of the great sports of this country and a wonderful community. Listen, Sam Stevens, thanks ever so much for joining us and talking in such detail about the football programme. All to look forward to here, right here at Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a warm welcome to the show. It is Jonny Gould here for about another half hour or so, and then we hand over the reins to Talk Sport on what is the busiest day in the sports calendar. We've got the King George VI chase at Kempton, and of course live commentary of Everton versus Manchester City. City can't buy a win anywhere, so will Everton win that one? Big questions ahead. 0344 499 1000. You on the phones later on this half hour, as well as the calls have gone really, really well today, and your text, and you're really engaged this Boxing Day in some of the big stories of the day. But let's first of all talk to Jonathan Sacerdotti, who's on the line. Jonathan, welcome to the show. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's in store for the Middle East. But first of all, you led a delegation of pro-Israel speakers at the Oxford Union and got yourself into basically a hornet's nest in what is supposed to be a sensible, organised, traditional debating chamber. In fact, it turned out to be really quite the opposite.
That's right. I was invited by the Oxford Union to a debate about the state of Israel. They were suggesting in the motion for debate that it was an apartheid state guilty of genocide, pretty outrageous in and of itself. But I think that what then shocked many people who've seen the video since, and it's been very widely covered in the media around the world, is that they really did the whole thing as a sort of show trial. I don't think they had any intention of having a fair debate. Instead, they yelled and shouted and abused me. There was a lot of swearing in English, in Arabic, not just me, all four of us on our team. So I think the Oxford Union really shamed itself that day and showed that it was no longer what it had claimed to be for all of its life, the last bastion of free speech. Instead, it was a sort of place to throw Jews and Arabs who were standing up for the Jewish state to the lions, and they expected us to crumble under the pressure of their abuse. But we certainly didn't. We stood up to it. And I'm pleased to say, actually, that my speech, whilst it didn't persuade many in that room, we obviously lost because they'd filled the room with haters, but it's been viewed over 1 million times on my X account alone. The uncensored version, of course, they tried to censor all the abuse when they put it up on their YouTube, but you can catch the uncensored version on my YouTube and on my X. Over 1 million people so far have, and it's still going up and up. So I'm really pleased about that, because more people get to at least hear a reasoned and fair debate, speech and argument in defence of Israel against those outrageous charges.
Indeed, it was raised in Parliament, and I said to Cormac Smith, a Ukrainian expert, just before, that what was said in Parliament, to me, is a deeply worrying concern on national security, because the Tory opposition leader asked Annalisa Dodds, are you going to write a letter to the Oxford Union to talk about the febrile show trial, the Inquisition almost, the bad atmosphere of what was supposed to be an institution of British history and tradition that was kind of swept aside with such a horrible, horrible so-called debate. And all she did was stood up and said, you know what we are, we're against anti-Semitism. So in other words, they're quite happy to put a banner up and say, no, 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 we're not like the old Labour, but actually leave a gaping hole in what is a form of national security, because you can imagine her saying that same thing, God forbid, the day after another atrocity, and we've had a few in this country. This is an issue of national security, Jonathan.
And more than that, I think it's obviously a demonstration. It's just one story like this. There are loads of them. It's a demonstration of a university. The Oxford Union Society isn't technically part of the university, but obviously it's got such a reputation. It's so attached to Oxford University by reputation. All the members have to be students of the university. So I think when you see something like that going on there, the closing of the mind of that generation, especially in relation to Israel and anti-Semitism, but on other issues as well, the inability to listen to reasoned argument, even when you don't agree with it, to maybe try to learn from experts on a topic who are teaching you or telling you about something that you maybe don't know about, rather than just screeching lies at them and slurs and abuse and swear words. So to hear that the government really just responded to the suggestion that they should contact the Oxford Union and maybe even the Oxford University authorities themselves, responding with this sort of platitude about not standing for anti-Semitism. I mean, it's great to hear them say that, but I think we've heard them say that sort of thing enough. Actions, obviously, are more important. I have actually spoken with Lord Haig's team. He's the incoming Chancellor of Oxford University. They are concerned about this, but it's a shame that this government isn't interested in doing that. And actually, if I can segue that into another topic, I think it's part of the environment and the climate in which we hear all sorts of stupid things said about Israel. Because if we're hearing it from somewhere like Oxford University, I don't know if you've seen this story about Bear Grylls, the TV presenter who likes to go to cold places and make fires out of twigs and stuff, a sort of guy who's never grown out to being a Boy Scout, has now apparently written a book about Jesus, and in a promotional tweet about it, he put out a video in which he explained the story of Jesus as being that of a Palestinian refugee. I mean, yeah, it doesn't bode well for the book. I'm not sure who's going to want to buy a book from a man that's that stupid. There's literally no way anybody can interpret the story of Jesus and Christmas in that way. Palestinians, of course, didn't exist. Jesus and Mary weren't refugees. They were on their way to be counted in a census by the Romans. He just showed a sort of unique level of ignorance. Maybe he should stick to the TV presenting. I've always wondered what it was he was trying to compensate for with the kind of macho man appearance and activities. Now I think we know it's a distinct lack of intellect and historical knowledge, but that hasn't stopped him writing the book. I don't think it's going to do very well, if you ask me, if that's the level of insult that he throws, not just at Jews, because, of course, Jesus and Mary were Jewish, so it's somewhat anti-Semitic to try and cancel that element of Christian history by calling them Palestinian, but it's also quite insulting to Christianity that he wants to try to tie the Christmas story, the story of Jesus, to the people who've most recently burst across Israel's border and raped and slaughtered and kidnapped people within Israel. I don't know why anybody would try to tie those two things together, but that's definitely what Bear Grylls has done here. I think he should stick to the day job and go and build an igloo and try and survive somewhere cold or something.
Yeah, put the kettle on, mate. The institutional narrative here as well, because I heard similar contours. It was my fault for watching the BBC on the Christmas morning, but the Bishop of Leeds piped up with something about Jesus being a refugee in an occupied territory. And I'm thinking to myself, what's he talking about? And this is the Bear Grylls sort of ABC book of history. He didn't mention the P word, the Palestinian word, but nevertheless, there's this narrative going on, which is a sort of element of what perhaps other people might call supersessionism, where I don't want to get into too much of a theological debate here, but this idea that Christianity becomes the new children of Israel, and I think that for peace and peace's sake, that we should all sort of stay out of our narratives and accept the kind of Old Testament story and the New Testament story. That they are different. They are different books, and they can coexist with each other.
Well, I just think it's also weird when you see people like this, perhaps just for publicity for this book, but trying to tie the stories of the origins of Christianity to modern-day conflicts like that in the Middle East. It's just utterly misguided and myopic, because the two don't really have anything to do with each other, and the attempt to slam them together in that way to show some sort of virtue signalling, I believe he's found religion himself as an adult, but it doesn't really show much depth of exploration of the religion, if you ask me. In order to misunderstand it that much, you either have to be ignorant or just be somebody with very little goodwill, because it's not possible to try to glue those two things together. And I would say that the reason it's somewhat anti-Semitic is that to deny Mary's and Jesus's Judaism, they were born in Judea, for goodness sake, the clue's in the name, and just it's a famous part of the story. I think it just displays an enormous amount of bad will from somebody at this season of goodwill related to what's apparently their own religion. I don't know why people need to do that. I don't think we need to compete over Jesus and try to attach him to current political causes, which themselves, as I said in this case, the Palestinians are at the moment not having their finest hour. They're deeply connected with the horrors that were carried out on October the 7th. And I think that that's not something that many people would want to associate with their religion, except perhaps Islam, because many of the attackers did so whilst shouting about jihad and a nation of jihad and the need to sacrifice thousands of Muslims in order to search for that nation of jihad. But I'm not sure that that's something that Bear Grylls should be doing to Christianity. I'm not a Christian, I'm a Jew, so it's not necessarily my place, but I just don't understand why anyone would do that. And I think that these increasing tendencies for people to try to politicise their religion and to try to tie it to that conflict, it's just really troubling. I think that in a way, it's one of these thinly veiled attempts to just bash Israel, bash the Jewish state from a position that tries to add a level of spiritual authority as well by saying that it's somehow religiously...
and delegitimise the state and ultimately try and call for its destruction. And now, over the hill comes 20th of January. All eyes on Washington, D.C. as Donald Trump II arrives I can't wait for his inauguration speech. He's not a great orator, but he is a great man of action, and this will have an immediate effect on the Middle East, won't it? It probably already is.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that famous tweet that he wrote about the hostages, and it is worth remembering at this time of festivities that there are still around 100 hostages being held in horrific circumstances and conditions in Gaza. In fact, many of them are believed not to be alive anymore, but the precise number isn't known. I think that Donald Trump has already speeded things up in the region. It's almost like he's president already. We barely see Joe Biden and Kamala, but we do see quite a lot of Trump, and I say much the better, because it's good that somebody who's got their cognitive abilities is really taking the reins again. And when it comes to the Middle East, I think that Trump is far more aligned with the right side of things, which is to say, in this instance, the Israeli side of things. Israel is doing a stellar job of fighting these jihadi enemies, whether they are Iranian-backed militias in the north, in Lebanon, in Gaza, now in Yemen. I mean, pretty much every night of the last week, the Houthis in Yemen have bombed or sent bombs over towards central Israel, Tel Aviv. People have been 2, 3, 4 in the morning rushing to their bomb shelters. I don't think that is a sustainable state of affairs. And so Israel will be looking to try to deal with the Houthis in the same way that it's dealt with Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south, and even with the remnants of Syria's chemical weapons and military equipment after the fall of Assad. I think Trump will probably be a breath of fresh air for Israel, but we never do know with him. And so looking into 2025, maybe we can see a reordering of the Middle East that will see it quieten down in a more peaceful way, but having eliminated many of the scarier parts. And who knows, maybe we can look forward to the downfall of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime there that has taken the Iranian people hostage. Most of them hate that regime, that tyrannical regime that's imposed that theocratic rule over them. So perhaps we will see the downfall of that through one means or another. We can only hope.
And maybe the reluctancy of the current deposed Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, he might get an appetite for leadership, at least as a constitutional monarch. You never know. Jonathan Sacerdotti, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and look forward to seeing you again soon. This is Talk. My name is Jonny Gould, but 10 or 15 minutes of the show to go, but your calls are just as important, so plenty of them after this. Stay tuned.
The fact of the matter is, you've got to, obviously, you've got to send out letters about people if they've not got a licence fee, and there was a licence fee previously at that address. But you don't say, are you going to be in on Christmas Day, and we may come round. And I think, you know what, I don't know what, in these situations where you always used to joke about it and say deputy heads will roll. I'm not saying that somebody's going to lose their job over it. I'm not going to say that at all, but I think someone's going to be in a very, very on the naughty step for quite some time.
Yeah,
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, it is the moment of roasted chestnuts, so it's time to talk about that old chestnut, which is net zero. And we go to the lines and talk to Francis from Wilton. Hello, Francis. How are you doing?
Hello, Johnny.
Hello. Merry Christmas. How are you doing? How are we doing?
Well, I've been following the story about reform today, and I shall just remain relaxed. We've got a long way to go because they, like the Conservatives, have got to be able to compete with the blob. And that's probably the biggest issue for any party now, is that we have a civil service that's completely against change. They want to run the country. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about net zero.
Yes.
Because we're going down the wrong path on net zero. Because CO2 is not the issue, has never been the issue. I study natural climate change, and CO2 doesn't even figure in that, because our climate has changed over millions of years. It's been hotter, it's been colder, and currently we're still, actually, would you believe, because all these fanatics that say we're about to burn to death, or boiled to death, as Antonio Guterres said, are just so wide of the mark. We're in an ice age still. Would you believe we're in an ice age?
Well, we are at the moment, but come the summer...
Well, no, climate doesn't work like that.
I'm being a bit flippant. Are we really in an ice age? I mean, there are those oil paintings from London in the 1900s, the 1800s, where London was iced over, but we don't have an iced over Thames anymore, do we?
No, well, that was the Little Ice Age. Now, that's been well documented across all the world. Now, the Little Ice Age, and yes, indeed, they were having fairs and all sorts of things on the Thames, but actually, we're now, would you believe, probably, and I can only say probably because you can never guarantee anything, through the Milankovitch cycle, through the Milankovitch solar cycles, we are now heading to a solar minimum, not just yet. And so, you know, I know on another channel they've been hoping for snow. That's going to become more likely.
Right, so it's going to get colder than before it gets warmer.
Well, the other thing I would say is that when you study climate, as I do,
yes,
we had a volcano, which was quite an unusual one, off Samoa in 2022, which ejected vast quantities of water vapor, which is more of a greenhouse gas than CO2 is, into the stratosphere. That's the very top level. So that's quite significant, actually, as you sort of get to work it all out. And so that's acting, probably the easiest way to describe it for everybody is that's a bit like a duvet. So
can I talk to you about my view on net zero? And I've been around the world a little bit in the recent weeks and months, and learnt that net zero is just a narrative of the guilty Western world and, shall we say, governments of the left persuasion, because this is not the narrative in the countries which produce oil and gas, like, for example, the UAE and Russia, who acknowledge that at least 2 more generations are going to rely on oil and gas. This idea to rush through blue energy is something that we contend with only in the West, and it's just not part of the conversation in the rest of the world, India and China as well.
Well, I would totally concur with you, Johnny. I think this is very much a Western disease. It's a Western liberal elite disease. You know, the more I look at real climate science, and, you know, I'm dealing with some of the very, very top scientists in the world who are not, inverted commas, client scientists or climate scientists, because climate science is very young, to be honest.
Yes.
And even Nobel laureates and Nobel winners are looking at the climate scientists and saying, well, they're not very scientific, really. They want to go for an outcome and try and prove that, like, you know, CO2 is terrible and it's going to kill us all. CO2 is the gas of life. And, you know, we would not survive without it.
Francis, thank you very much indeed. He's got a point, hasn't he? I think it's very important for us to question this narrative when people from world governments say things like, it's going to boil us up. This is palpable nonsense, isn't it? It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you over Christmas and Boxing Day. My name's been Jonny Gould, and I guess what? It'll remain Jonny Gould into the new year, where I hope to be joining you once again. All that remains for me to say to you is Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you very much to all the guys through the window who made this all possible. My name's Jonny Gould. Merry Christmas.